Have you ever wanted to put biomes across your custom Minecraft map in Worldpainter? Well, this is how to do it with extreme geographic accuracy so that your world can appear and act as realistically as it would in many locations in the world today. So without further ado, let's get on to this video. To start off, let's get a couple geographic rules out of the way. Firstly, rainfall and temperature are dictated by water currents, between hot and cold water currents. On this world that I have behind me, which is a project which I worked on for a server, I have the hot and cold currents on screen to show you what everything is. A couple basic rules that also need to be applied, which is, firstly, the higher up you go, generally, the colder it gets. Secondly, that the higher up you go, due to the rain shadow effect, generally the higher precipitation or rainfall an area will receive up to a certain point. Obviously, if it's completely above the clouds, then that principle gets thrown out the window. And thirdly, that the amount of rainfall and its height dictates the Minecraft biome. That's just an assumption we're going to have to make for this. Just to get some things out of the way as well. If you want your world to have a lot of biodiversity, if you want there to be many different biomes, I suggest building a large island like I have behind me with lots of little peninsulas and high mountains so that you can create this large, different, diverse landscape. Or else it makes no sense if it just transitions between one biome and another, when hypothetically all the conditions like the rainfall should be the same when it's the same altitude, etc. So, back onto currents, which is sort of the thing that you have to underpin first when you are designing your world. Cold water currents result in less evaporation from the water, from the sea, resulting in less clouds and ultimately less rain in that area. You need to account wind direction, mostly. Obviously, if your map is enormous, then no. But wind direction and ocean currents are what are going to dictate which area receives more or less precipitation. On the map behind me, I've got a east to west wind current generally. And the ocean currents are that they are warm on the eastern side, and then as they reach the western side, they cool off. But now, a couple things about each biome that you want to be looking at and their different characteristics. Firstly, plains. Plains are going to be your stock standard biome in regions that receive a fair amount of precipitation. However, consider it not enough precipitation to garner forests or whatnot. You can kind of intertwine plains and forests, even if they're on the exact same environment, because that's kind of what happened live. It's just about whether or not the tree grows there. But when we're looking into other things like savanna is obviously going to be like a plains, but in regions with a lot less precipitation. Not as little as a desert or badlands, which desert and badlands should receive little to no precipitation. So they should be on the coast or on the interior where there is a very cold water current or just behind a rain shadow. Spruce generally grows in, like taiga, generally grows in colder climates. So if you're going to have it on one island and you want to have as much biodiversity as possible, you're going to be positioning it so that the spruce is going to be at higher altitudes, which you can set each arbitrary threshold as you like. Rainforests are obviously on the areas with a lot or maximum precipitation. So on my map behind me, I've got it situated on the far eastern side, actually just where there's a nice big mountain range. So that way there's both the rain shadow effect, which is sort of forcing the clouds to release their water as it runs into these mountains. It does some funny things with air pressure, etc. I'm not going to explain it all here. All you should know is high mountains result in higher precipitation. Thus, when it's on a warm water current, lots of rain, winds in its direction, and a mountain, you're going to get a rainforest. Now, swamps. Swamps need to be in areas with lots of fresh water, but not necessarily like a lake. They need to be in areas where there's lots of fresh water, sort of like meandering around, lake, like little tiny lakes, like a swamp. That's how we think of it normally. So for my map behind me, I put the swamps in regions where there's river deltas, and I suggest you watch my rivers episode for more information, but this is essentially the point where the river meets the sea. It expands as it releases its sediment, etc., creating these narrow little channels which are perfect for the swamp environment. Now for ocean biomes, we've got coral reefs. Coral reefs are going to be found in usually the warmest of oceans. They can only form in shallow areas, and they usually form as shallow plateaus rising up up from the ocean seabed, which receive high amounts of sunlight and thus can get growth. They form atolls, which are sort of like this horseshoe-shaped object, or like thing, which is usually what many reefs are like, but shallow bays, atolls, plateaus, etc. are going to be where you're going to be wanting to make this coral reef. Now, for the more rare biomes, so like mushroom islands, cherry blossoms, etc. Although they aren't really real-life biomes, I suggest for your maps, like realism, that you put them on the extremities of the map. So like what I did is you can create, if you like, I suggest building an island. Islands are just the best thing to do in Worldpainter. If you put them on as like a little island, separated from the main island at like the bottom or like a far end of the map, you're going to create like this unique place that people might have to discover, and they'll find this cool biome, but otherwise they don't discover it. It's sort of like a cool exploration thing. You can see I sort of made New Zealand as a mushroom island on the bottom right of the map. And for dark oak biomes are going to be areas that are temperate, so they're cooler. They receive high precipitation, but they're not necessarily at high altitudes. So whereas spruce would be more of a high altitude thing, it doesn't need to be as cold for dark oak too. So here's the checklist, FonkeMonke's checklist. First, draw yourself some water currents on your world. Where is the hot and the warm currents coming from? How will this influence your biomes? Wind direction as well. Good. Where are your mountains? How tall are they? And how will they be influenced by wind direction, precipitation, rainfall? And then thus, where should my different biomes go? What do I want this area to be? What does it make sense to be, etc. And if you followed that checklist, well, you should be all good. Yeah, that's really all there is to it. Yeah, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next tutorial, which should be glaciers.